probably late afternoon by the time you heard this. I am getting a little bit of a late start today, but either way, welcome back to Breakfast with a Heathen. Maybe we'll call this Brunch with a Heathen today because I, again, got a little bit of a late start. But I am your favorite heathen. I am Mike Smithcall, and this is our Sunday morning show where we talk about just various questions that have come up either directly to me or in various forums that I follow, and just giving my perspective as a middle-aged white guy and an atheist. And these are obviously going to have to do with religion in general. But the reason I do this is because there are people out there like me in my age, or people that were like me when I was, say, in my teens and started to really kind of pull away from the church because I wasn't really a believer, but I hadn't decided where I fell yet. And then throughout the next, say, 30 years of my life, as I kind of went through this journey. So somebody out there is on one of those steps along that path. And we often talk about with atheism, it is a journey. Most people don't switch overnight. It's something that something hits them, they think about something catches them off guard, and they start to question, and there's usually a process of what we call deconstruction or deconversion. So this is what this show is all about, but we keep it super happy and friendly because it's Sunday, or maybe you're listening to this on the car, on the drive-in, during the week, and that's fine too. But, this isn't a fiery rhetoric show. That is not the design of this show any means. So I might say something that bothers you, but it is not my intention to directly rile you up. And it's really not my intention to do that in any other part of the day. But, without any further ado, let's jump into our first question. All right, so this is from Realistic Bed 5137, and he says the title is that, "Am I wrong for not believing?" And it says, "I, 16-year-old male, have recently, these last couple months, have been doubting the existence of God. I haven't told anybody besides my close friend who thinks the same way. I'm nervous about telling people because everyone around me believes in God. And I used to be a Catholic Christian. And I realized how unrealistic the whole thing is and looked more into the philosophy, and that's how I came to that conclusion." So let's go back to the title of their question. Am I wrong for not believing? No, you're not wrong. So when you're 16 years old, which is about, I guess, I was probably a little bit younger than that when I started to pull away, and I was never a very strong believer. So I always kind of preface that. It wasn't as a big of a conversion for me. But I was a teenager for sure, let's just say that, when I started to pull away and started to have different beliefs than, say, my parents and the people around me. Now, I grew up Episcopal in the South, so even being Episcopal put me at odds with most of the people that are around me in North Florida, where I grew up, which is heavy Baptist country, Southern Baptist. But for this person, no, you're not wrong for not believing. So rid yourself of that thought. If anything, you're 16 years old, and who knows where this is going to go, but you're questioning things, which I would say is your responsibility as a young person, and really any age, but as a young person, you should question everything. That doesn't mean you have to be disrespectful. That doesn't mean you have to be belligerent, but you should question things because that's what makes you a better human being. You have a better understanding of the world. And I say question everything, meaning, I'm trying to think of a good example of something you shouldn't question just flat out. If someone says, "Hey, don't go in that room, it's full of poisonous gas," all right, you might want to take that to the bank for the moment. But if someone says, no, there's a God, and that God is watching you, so make sure you don't masturbate, well, maybe you should question that. Ask them why. Ask them to prove that there's a God. If someone says, the earth is flat, okay, explain that to me and show me how that's true. I'm using those sort of two different extremes, but that's the point. You're 16 years old. Everything in the world is basically new to you. I always have to be real careful because I remember being 16 and I remember feeling like you're a man, but you've not yet done man things. And I'm putting man in quotes, meaning adult things. I haven't lived on my own. I haven't gotten married. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a car payment. All these things that I really didn't have at 16. And a few years later, I had those various things. And over the next 10 years, I think I had all of those things. You start to feel much more of an adult when you have to have responsibilities. But at 16 years old, you've had a very limited life exposure, and you should question everything. And you not believing in God is not bad. Again, you may turn back to God, and that's fine. I'm not one of those atheists that says you're wrong to do that. I think, though, however, you're already on a path to discovery, the same as I am, the same as millions of other atheists are, where what you heard and what you were taught and what you were told and probably, most likely, just accepted at face value, well, some of that's not making sense to you now that you're a little bit older, now that you have a little bit more of a critical thinking cap on, and you're seeing things in a different light. That process, and I pray, I'm putting quotes around the pray, I pray that doesn't ever go away. You should be 55 years old someday and hear something or have someone tell you something and think, that doesn't seem to make sense. That doesn't pass the smell test, or something not quite right with that statement. And then you should go investigate that. And you should go discover as much as you can within the boundaries of your life, and then make a decision and make an informed decision. And right now, at 16 years old, and let's back this guy up, at 15 years old, he wasn't doing that because he probably was raised, like most of us, in a church environment around other people. And he does say he was Catholic. Okay, so he believed everything he was told. That's fine. But, I say fine. I wish that wasn't how things worked, but that's the way things work. And I can accept that that's just the world that we live in. But at 16, you're starting to pull away. And I've told young parents this all the time, that when your kids are 12, 13 years old, the difference between 12 and 13 and 20 in terms of time is instant. They're a 12-year-old little boy, and all of a sudden you turn around, they're a 20-year-old man. And it's like, when the hell did that happen? But it does. It happens so rapidly. And 16 that's one of those years where you've got a foot in both sides. You're a boy and you're a man at the same time. And that space gives you a lot of opportunity to learn and start to develop. And I would tell this young man, realistic bed 5137, explore, just devour information, just read and talk to people and think things out loud and talk to friends and just explore and investigate. And don't be afraid of where it takes you. So, and this is kind of where I'm hearing it a little bit in that question. Am I wrong? You're asking that question because there's obviously a seed of doubt that you're doing something wrong. You're not. You're exploring the world you live in, and you're going to come to your own conclusions based on the information you gather. Now, again, you may gather information and interpret that information differently than I did. That's totally fine. But you also may grab that information and interpret it differently than your parents did, and that's fine as well. So, again, realistic bed 5137, good luck on that. If you ever hear this and you want to ask me a question or send something in, I am happy to talk to you about that. And again, I wish you good luck on that. All right, so this is a comment that I got on one of my videos, and I usually write that down. I didn't actually write down which video sparked this. It was a recent comment, though. This is from I'm XM Goner. I don't know if it's XM. I'm going to spell this out. I am capital AXEM GONER. I XM Goner. Okay. I can't sometimes figure these names out. But anyways, this is a comment they sent directly to me. And it said, atheists obsessing over God they claim doesn't exist and can't ground morality in anything other than opinion. Gen Z will bring back thy love of God once they stop aborting them en masse. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm not gonna address the abortion part, blah blah, because that's just normal rhetoric. But I'm gonna address this first part: atheists obsessing over the God they claim doesn't exist. That's a very common statement that I think all atheists have heard. There's a handful of common things that all atheists hear. You're going to go to hell, being the number one thing. That's the number one thing. You can't disprove God is another thing. But this idea that you're obsessing over God, you don't even believe in it. Well, I can guarantee you that for the most part, atheists do not obsess over God. We obsess over your obsession over God and your insistence that your God influence everyone else, including us. That's what we obsess over. And if obsess is even the right word, I'm going to give this guy I'm going to give him obsess. We're going to use that word, meaning that if I didn't have to wake up and read the news and see that some religious oriented law is trying to be passed, if I didn't have to hear my local city council or my governor or the president or any of these other people who are in charge and can make laws that affect my life, if I didn't see them hold up a Bible or say, it says in the Bible, or use the Bible to justify a law, not just what they want to do in their own house, I don't care what they do in their own house, but to justify a law that I will then have to live under. If they use the Bible to do that, I have a problem with that. And unfortunately, over the last 10, 15 years, and probably longer, but it's certainly gotten stronger over the last 10 years, the Christian nationalism movement has become so strong. And we've talked about it on this show, and I've talked about it on some of our other shows, that even though religion itself is on a downward trend, Christian nationalism is on an upward trend in terms of the government. I do obsess over that because it directly affects my life. You believing in God doesn't affect me at all. And there's a big distinction there that, when this person here, again, the I Axum Goner, I don't know if they are, what's the way I could say this? I'm just going to say it. I don't know if they're dumb, meaning they don't see the distinction, or they're being intentionally disingenuous. And I don't really mean to say that they are a dumb person. I should have used a better word, but I can't think of one off the top of my head, because I very often, I think there's, again, some intentional, disingenuous agenda there. They frame it in such a way, and they frame it in a way of, leave us poor Christians alone. We just want to get along. Like, okay, well, if you could stop putting a Christian church on every corner, and if you could stop going door to door, and if you could stop electing every single president for the history of our country, and if you could stop making laws based on your book, nobody would care. I wouldn't bring up Christianity ever again. The same way I don't bring up Buddhism. I'm very well aware of Buddhism. I was just spent a month in Asia where Buddhism is everywhere. But in the United States, it's tiny. It's almost non-existent in the grand scheme of things. I just don't care. People are Buddhists, and I don't care. It has zero impact on my life, so let them be Buddhists. Scientologists, same thing. I find it ridiculous and wacky. Do I know a Scientologist? No. I don't know a single Scientologist. I don't know that there's a Scientologist governor. I don't know that there's a Scientologist mayor. If there are, I'm not aware of them, and they have zero effect on me. I'm trying to think. Actually, there was a Scientologist church, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that's what they call them, in San Diego when we lived there. Didn't see Scientologists. They didn't come to my door. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing. If Christianity involved or occupied that same realm of it only affected the people that believed in it, knock yourself out. Believe that a guy spent a long weekend in the belly of a whale. Fine. Say that that you can talk to a burning bush. Fine. Believe what you want. I don't care. So I'm not obsessed over God. I'm obsessed over your obsession and insistence that your God control my life. I hope that's clear, because I'm thinking I'm making it pretty clear, but I hope it's clear. This next one is from Concrete Cloverleaf. This is a controversial thing. In fact, I just did a mic drop on this. So if you go back, I guess it was a week or two ago. So we're in January right now, January 26th of 2026, I should say. So look for the mic drop on this particular topic. But the question here from Concrete Cloverleaf is, can students fail an assignment if they cite God, not if Florida Republicans get their way. That's their title. And he talks about a Florida bill, and it says possibly inspired by Samantha Fulnicki fiasco, that would prohibit Florida schools from applying an academic penalty to students expressing their religious, political, or ideological beliefs. And they say the person raises the concerns that allow students to avoid bad grades for subpar work by inserting a religious claim and hoping that the markers, meaning they say the teachers, are scared of running afoul of the law. So they're absolutely right. Now, it's not a law yet. It's in committee. So this is SB 1006 and HB 835, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. So this is the Senate and House bill in Florida, and it's in committee. So it's not yet a law, but it's there. I mean, these people wrote it up, and I can't remember the two politicians off the top of my head who did it. I think Yarborough and Barrero, and I may be wrong, but they have made this law that I say absolutely is inspired by Samantha Fulnicki. Now, Fulnicki was what is she? I think she was a college freshman in Oklahoma, and she was asked to write a paper about gender studies. And I don't have my notes in front of me from that particular show, but again, go back and watch my mic drop from January of 2026. But she was asked to write this essay based on the question that was specifically asked. Well, she didn't do that. Instead, she basically wrote a sermon that says that gender, there's only two genders, and that's the way God made them, and anything that's not along that lines is demonic. Okay, well, the teacher, I think it was a teaching assistant, failed her because she didn't address the actual question. Fine that she has those beliefs, but that's not the question. It's like asking you, what is 2 + 2? And you say, well, Jesus rose from the dead 3 days later. Well, that's fine and dandy, but it doesn't answer what 2 + 2 is. It has zero to do with the answer. And in college and in school in general, you're going to get questions that you may disagree with the premise of it, but that's not the point. I could read a book assigned to me by a teacher that I just disagree with the premise of the book. I don't like it. I don't like the author. I don't like the author's politics, whatever the case may be. But that doesn't allow me to avoid writing the book report. I should write the book report based on what's in the book, not what I wish the book had said. Big difference, right? So in Florida, they've got these bills that are running their way through the House and the Senate there that will, this is for high school, that will make the expression of religious belief within a paper basically give you a free pass. And they've said that you can express your ideas, and if you do so and you're failed, and they can say that you were failed because of your religious beliefs, which is very tricky, you can sue the school for up to, it's a mandated amount between $15,000 and $25,000. Mandated amount, okay? And they've also removed any protection the school may have for any kind of immunity. So what they're saying here, and what this person's alluding to, is you could have 10 students in a room, and 9 students do the assignment to the letter. Doesn't matter where they come down politically or religiously or anything else. The 10th student does the same basic assignment, but they put in religion. And if they do that assignment poorly, they can say, no, because I put religion, that's why you failed me. And good luck. This is Florida. Good luck having that not be the case in terms of proving that that's not the case. It's a $25,000 payout. So where this went, and I probably have not said this very well in this last few minutes. I did it much better in the mic drop. But basically what that's saying is you can be rewarded for doing poor work or no work, essentially. You're not following the actual instruction of the teacher and putting in your religious beliefs. You can be rewarded for doing that poor work, for not doing the assignment, and you get a $25,000 check. So there's an incentive for doing bad work. There's an incentive for claiming religion. And what that's going to have is what they refer to as a chilling effect. If I'm a teacher and I see this person did not follow the orders and did not follow the instructions and didn't maybe even read the assignment at all, but they kind of half-assed it and they put in some religious beliefs, I have to make a decision. Am I going to fail this person and then have to be deposed and everything else, go through court, and also have them get a $25,000 payout? Or am I just going to go ahead and pass them? Because it's not worth the effort. I can guarantee you school districts are going to do the math, because nobody seems to have any integrity anymore. It's all about the dollars and the cents. School districts are going to do the math, and they're going to say, okay, it's going to cost us X amount of dollars to fight this. The minimum we'd have to pay is $15,000 plus attorney fees. That's the way the law is structured. Is the cost of fighting this and the PR and yada, 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 is that worth more than $15,000? Or can we just settle this thing for $15,000 and move on? Now, tell us honestly, where do you think this is going to fall, especially in the South? The problem is going to be smaller school districts could easily get hurt quite a bit from this. It's going to be a problem, because guarantee it's not going to be the 13-year-old who does this. It's going to be the mom or the dad of the 13-year-old who pushes this. And there's going to be people out there, just like there are now, that are going to turn this into sport. That's what they're going to do. Their college fund is going to be paid for by these sort of lawsuits. And they're going to push the agenda. And they're going to push it to the point where it maybe gets taken further up and ends up in some sort of Supreme Court somehow. It's devious. It's devious, and it's just, again, further proof of what I mentioned earlier about this Christian nationalism just working its way like an infection. It's everywhere. I can't stand it. Okay, well, actually, this was sort of an unintended segue, but the next question I had on my list here is from So Who is Karl Marx 5591. Now, Karl, I always call him Karl. Karl has been we'll say a special friend of my show. He writes in constantly, and Karl and I disagree 180 degrees in terms of religious things. He might be a fine young man or old man. I don't really know how old he is, but he could be a fine guy. I just don't know, other than his comments, and he comments frequently. So I appreciate him listening, and I do appreciate his comments, and they're generally fairly civil. But coming on the heels of what I just discussed, his comment on that same video regarding the law that's being proposed in Florida. He says, cool. Now, what's the difference between getting a passing grade by regurgitating false secular dogma? That can't be justified. Well, Karl does this a lot. He tends to make up a situation that didn't actually happen and then address it or question it. First of all, his regurgitating false secular dogma, there's a lot of heavy lifting being done there. Karl would tend to believe that anything that's not religious is secular dogma. He just has that way about him. Evolution is one of the things he mentioned. He disputes it. He says there is no such thing as evolution, that atheists are basically falling for this. We're all sort of dumb for having done so. And that, if we just look around, we can see that most everybody doesn't believe atheism or doesn't believe evolution anymore. I mean, he's created this whole world in his head that I don't think exists, but that's what he believes. That's fine. But he would say that if I was an instructor and I asked students to discuss evolution, and I just said discuss evolution or discuss the process of evolution as we understand it, and a student wrote, there is no such thing as evolution. God created man and God created the entire world in 6 days. Karl would say that any student that wrote the opposite, any student that talked about evolution, any student that talked about the timeline and how things evolve and everything else, that person is just regurgitating false secular dogma. Where Tiffany, the one student that said God created everything, they're the right student. And again, unfortunately, if that bill passes, Tiffany could go and get $25,000 because she didn't discuss evolution, which was the instruction. She decided to go on a rant and then preach, and she would get 25 grand for that. Karl sees nothing wrong with that. So Karl, again, I'll address you here, and I've addressed Karl plenty of times. He and I go back and forth on this, again, civilly, friendly, but we totally disagree. Regurgitating false secular dogma, that's not the way it works. It's just not the way it works. You're regurgitating information, I guess, if you want to use that word for regurgitating. But we're asking you, in this case, you're asking the kids to describe what they've learned. Describe what they've learned. Now, if you want to call that secular dogma, fine. But the instruction that we talked about, and the one that the Florida law seems to impose, is you're following the instruction. You don't have to agree or disagree with everything. And we'll use history, for example. History, the facts themselves are not necessarily up for interpretation, but why things happened are sometimes up for interpretation. That's fine. But if I asked you to describe what year the Declaration of Independence was signed, and you say 1830, you're wrong. You're just flat out wrong, right? That I'm asking you to talk about the Declaration of Independence and the year that it was done. You giving me something else that's not the assignment. You don't have to agree, you don't have to believe, but that's not the assignment. If I asked you to talk about the globe and you say, well, the earth is flat, that's not the assignment. You can believe that. I think you're dumb, but you can believe that. But the point is, we've asked you to talk about the globe, why the earth is generally round, all these other things. That's what we're asking you to say. So Carl, he doesn't like that kind of stuff, but that's the way Carl is. Oh, Carl. All right, this one is from throwra_os. Do ex-Christians think Jesus actually existed? So this person says they're ex-Muslim, not trying to convert or anything, just a random thought. Do ex-Christians think Jesus was a real historical person? Growing up Muslim, we were taught Jesus was born without a father, but that's not biologically possible. So was he ever born at all? I don't really know the answer to this. I listen to a lot of different people, and it does seem that there's a general consensus, and I say general because there's people that on both sides of the argument, but it does seem that there was a person that took on the role of Jesus, or was the sort of the germ of that concept. Now, at the same time, even the people that say this don't say that he was magical, that he was the Son of God. He was most likely some sort of a preacher. There's a lot of preachers today, but that doesn't elevate them to the level of what Jesus became in terms of the myth that we think of Jesus now. Was there a guy, and I forget what the original term would have been in the original language. I literally can't remember. It's not Yahweh. It's something else. Is it Jehovah? Is that what it was? I can't remember. But was there a guy with that name walking around and had some level of following? Sure, possibly. Yeah, absolutely. Did he turn water into wine? No, he did not. Did he walk on water? No, he did not. Was his mother a virgin that gave birth after God and pregnant? No, that didn't happen. I mean, so this is saying, was there a guy who was a preacher and obviously would have been probably Jewish at the time, right? Was there a Jewish preacher wandering around the desert? Maybe, yeah, fine. I can live with that idea. I really have no problem with that. But just like we've seen with other people throughout history, the elevation of what someone really was and what the myth around them becomes later is sometimes quite interesting, to say the least. And I'm going to use one right here that's going to inflame somebody, but realize I'm doing that for effect because we're watching it in real time. There was a guy named Charlie Kirk. Right now, someone's triggered. But there was a guy named Charlie Kirk, and he was a provocative person. That was his brand. He was a provocateur. He made his living being a provocateur. Let's just keep it at that, right? That man, unfortunately and sadly, was murdered on live television, basically. It was going on live. He was murdered. That is horrific. But the deification of him, and by proxy his wife, which is really playing out poorly, I think, but he instantly became this sort of deity-like figure. Now, give him 100 years, where does it go? I personally don't think it's going to go as far as some people think it will, but let's just say it went the other direction. 100 years from now, he will be a saint in the sense of, the odd thing is, we won't have a lot of direct quotes from him to prop him up. It will be what people have said about him. Does that sound familiar? We don't have direct quotes from Jesus at the time that this person maybe walked the earth and said whatever he said. We have people from many, many decades later saying what they heard he said. It's not the same thing. So if 100 years from now, people are saying that Charlie Kirk said this, that, and the other, and it sounds like instead of Charlie Kirk, it was Mr. Rogers, well, that's the history that could be written. That doesn't make it true. It doesn't make that he was a great person necessarily. Doesn't mean that he had any special powers. 1,000 years from now, if that same story continued to play this sort of game of post office where each person hears it a little bit differently and adds to it, I don't know. What do you get? That's how Jesus, to me, got developed. Because again, we go back, it was 60, 70 years later after Jesus' death, again, assuming there was a death, that the books started to be written. And they were written and interpreted and rewritten and reinterpreted and pieces pulled out and pieces added. And different people had different stories and different recollections of what they had been told. So what was the real person like? I don't know. Let's assume that he was a good guy. I'm fine with that. But again, didn't turn fish, or loaves and everything into fish. He didn't do that. He didn't walk on water. He wasn't magical. So yeah, I do kind of lean into that he was probably a real guy. But am I going to go study it? No, I really don't care. I just don't care enough it doesn't, to me, that doesn't affect how I believe. Meaning that if there was a real guy that was the Jesus that sparked this whole thing, that's fine. L. Ron Hubbard was a real guy, and we have Scientology. So, things change. All right, this next one is Plushy Meow. Plushy Meow. So, do we need to respect religion? And I say, I often see religious people saying that atheists should respect them and not be rude. And this is, religions can have a positive impact, yes, but it can also have a lot of negative impact. It's well known that religion has allowed predators to use it as cover to abuse children. There's also a lot of misogyny surrounding it, and I've noticed that many people use it as an excuse to be racist and homophobic. Well, I agree with that. I agree with all those sort of things. That doesn't mean that other groups don't do it as well, but religion does get a bit of a odd pass sometimes for some of the negative things because the draw and the strong connection to the religion and God and all these other things allows people to overlook some of the most horrendous crimes because the religious part of it, the component that involves God, is so strong. So back to their question, do we need to respect religion? I go back and forth on this and I'm trying to thread the needle perhaps, but should you respect the people? Sure. If people do something and they believe something that disagrees with how you think, even if it's not particularly good, respect the person until they've done something worthy of disrespect. I am saying that again, and I'm sure someone's going to give you an example where that's true, and I could probably agree with you on that. But give the person general respect. I mean, respect is earned, but as a general principle, if I meet somebody for the first time, I'm automatically just going to give them human dignity and human respect. The religion that they believe in. Okay, let's say the religion itself, meaning that the person believes in a God. Is that bad? No. Am I going to disrespect it? I'm going to go spit on a crucifix? No. That would, first of all, it's just kind of a dick thing to do. Like, why? I wouldn't spit on anything like that. So what's the point? Again, I'm not a provocateur in that sense. I don't go out there and purposely try to create situations and then cry victim when people come after me. People would say maybe I do this show and it creates that, but no, I'm doing this show sometimes to get things off my chest or just to put out perspective out there. But I've said this a million times today. You can believe which one. I don't care. It doesn't bother me that you believe it. I'm not a victim of your belief. I push back on your belief, but I'm not a victim of it. So in this sense, I'm not going to be disrespectful for you just because, or to you, just because you believe in God, or you believe in Allah, or you follow Buddha, or any other religion that has been created. I might find it silly. I might find your practices to be bad and not worthy of respect, and I very well may push back on those practices. But recognize, and we're going to stick with Christianity here for the next moment, Christianity by itself, just the belief in God and the belief of a Jesus by itself, fairly benign, right? Because I know people that are fairly benign. They do believe, They're not bad people. They believe. But there I also know people that use that religion, they twist that religion to support their beliefs in terms of the things they believe, like this person mentioned, misogynistic, homophobic. Um, when people do that and they use that religion, well, yeah, I can disrespect that, right? And again, I'm threading the needle, and I know that I am because I'm trying to like recognize that there are good people in the world. There are plenty of good, hardworking, warm-hearted people that just want nothing more than to get through life and raise their children and take care of their parents and everything else and have some fun along the way, and then they're going to die. And there are other people out there that do seem to be just pure evil. And they do cruel things for cruelty's sake. And they try to mask it with religion, as this person sort of applies. So the religion itself, I don't disrespect. The person themselves and the practices that they may take and they hold up saying, well, Christianity told me to do this. I'm calling bullshit on that. You're just a bad person, and you found a way to justify it. And unfortunately, and I think I've made a video on this as well, you found a way to justify it that unfortunately far too many other believers are conflicted enough that they won't push back on it because they feel that that if they put too much mud on this person, it's going to get a little bit back on themselves. So they just turn the other cheek, so to speak, and they look the other way and they let things go. And if they do anything at all, it's a very small lip service. Like, well, that's not a true Christian. Yeah, but they're holding up your same book. You should be loud. You should be louder than me. And again, I know I've made a video on that or I've made some comments on that, but you should be louder than me. So I should be second in line. If I'm disrespecting the person because they're being homophobic or misogynistic or they're abusing children in the name of God, you should be well ahead of me, screaming at the top of your lungs, because that's your religion. Don't come for me because you think I'm being disrespectful. Well, there, on the heels of that, and again, completely different person. I don't know how this segued so perfectly, but it kind of does. This is from Revolving Depression. It says, do you have an opinion on women pastors and why women can't teach men? So we just talked about misogyny. And again, this totally did not set this up. I just sort of sort these as kind of randomly, and I go down the list. I don't try to connect the dots. Half time, I don't even read the question before I get to it. I just kind of read the general title. This is a part I never really understood. I mean, I know it says it in the Bible. Is it Timothy? I can't remember the exact number, but it's Timothy, where he talks about women should not teach men, essentially. And they've used that in many, many religions, or in many, I should say, sects, if you will, of Christianity, to not let women hold any sort of position within the church. And in some families, I did a video on this, many months ago about, what is his name? Doug Wilson. He has a church out in Idaho. The name of the church is escaping me at the moment, but they interviewed some of his like lead pastors or co-pastors, whatever those guys are called, that run the church, and very male, patriarchal family, to the point of the one guy wanted to get rid of women's voting because he said, basically, I will let her know what she needs to think. I am not making that up. Go back and watch that video. It's from several months ago, but if you look on the website at atheistville.com, look for the video on Doug Wilson, and you'll see him say that on video. And the man is very clear. The other man didn't go quite as far as about getting rid of the vote, but basically that she should vote like he does. And it was funny how he said basically, if she disagreed with him, then they would have a family discussion, which meant that he would keep talking to her until she agreed with him. It was very clear. I mean, there was no question there. That wife of that man was not going to be allowed to vote differently than he is. Because, obviously, women should not be higher, should not teach, should not have a position or an opinion greater than a man. Well, I'm 55 years old. I'm not a kid, but man, I grew up in a society where my mom worked all my life, for the most part. Everyone else I knew, for the most part, their mom and dad worked. My wife has always worked. The equality was just built into me. By the time I became aware of things, women's equality wasn't necessarily even a term per se, because the movement had already started and it was already starting to be built in. So when I came of age in the 80s, Women worked. And now, there's still a lot of problems. I'm not going to get into that because we obviously know that exists. But it wasn't like women stayed home and just, baked cookies and took care of the kids. That wasn't the case in the 80s when I was a teenager. And it's certainly not the case now. So this idea that women shouldn't teach men, which is another way of saying basically women's opinions don't matter, is so foreign to me. I just don't even understand how anybody, and women specifically, and we've all seen them, these trad wife kind of people, how they can support that. If a woman wants to stay home and just take care of the kids, more power to her. I have zero problem with that. And I think that more parents should do that. And I say parents, husband or wife, whoever wants to stay home and take care of the kids do need a lot of attention. And we probably as a society don't do a good job of that because of the economics. But that's fine. I have no problem with that. But at the same time, goodness gracious, to imply that a woman shouldn't have an opinion, that it's just so strange to me. And to know that that is biblically supported and that people hold that up. And there are churches, full churches and organizations built around that. And that you could never be a woman and hold any sort of office within a church. Mind-blowing to me. And again, I'm not a kid. I'm not this liberal 20-year-old who's lived in a bubble. I am 55 years old. I've seen a lot of different things and throughout our lives here in the United States and around the world. So I know a lot of different sides of a lot of different things, and I just can't get it out of my head that we could ever live in a society where women are treated like second-class citizens. Now, again, I know there's income disparities and all these other things. I'm not naive to this. But the general concept that women should be lower than a man, I just don't get it. I wouldn't raise, and I didn't raise my daughter that way. My wife is not treated that way. I hope my nieces are never treated that way. They're not now by their parents. It drives me crazy. It's just one of those things that, and because it's religious based, and they use that. I mean, we always had patriarchal societies. I get it. Patriarchal societies exist all over the globe. I get it. That's fine. Well, I say fine. I get that it exists. That's the fine part. I'm not disputing that, I guess is a better way of saying that. But when you then take religion that triggers people and you say, it's not just me being a misogynist dick of a man. It's God saying that. Well, now you've elevated it. And because people are predisposed sometimes to just follow God blindly and follow this guy who's standing at a podium holding up a book that I have sitting on my shelf right next to me. And he says, God says, that women are second-class citizens and women's opinions don't matter and women should be quiet. How do you sit through the rest of that without getting up and leaving? I don't get it. I will never get it. I'm going to agree to disagree with you if that's what you believe, because I will not get it. I don't even want to get it because it's illogical. Just ridiculous. All right, let's see what we got. Oh, here's a good one. This would be good for my friend Cynthia. Cynthia McDonald is a friend of mine, and she is the head of the Black non-believers here in Chicago. And she's been on the show many times on our Unholy Roundtable. She's a frequent guest on that show. So this would actually be a really good show for a good question for her. But I saw it, I'm going to add this in just in case whoever happens to be listening. So this person, Shep DC1. So their question is, do you think more secular organizations need to reach out to HBCUs, so historically black colleges, universities? And I'm going to speak for Cynthia here because I'm pretty sure I would know where she's going. But yeah, they should. I've told this story when she and I did a one-on-one and some of our different unholy roundtables, where I just didn't really have a good understanding of how atheism existed within, say, the Black community. I just don't know, right? And I specifically sought her out so I could find out more about that. I wanted to find out how atheism was treated among the Black community. Because I always tell people, I know what it's like for me as a middle-aged white guy in America, but that perspective is not the same. And I found out very clearly it is not the same throughout the Black community. One of the things that I always use because it just blew me away, and I've mentioned this to lots of people, just talking with them in conversation, One of the gentlemen I met at one of her meetings, again, this is the Chicago branch of the Black non-believers, he mentioned that when you come out as a Black person, as an atheist, one of the things that people will ask you or imply is that you are betraying your Blackness, which blew me away. I never thought of it that way, because when I say I'm an atheist, no one's questioning or associating it with my race at all. Not even, it doesn't even come up, right? Nobody cares. I mean, there's problems with it and it causes some issues, but nobody associates being an atheist or even being, say, religious with my race. But what this gentleman's point was, and I think it was absolutely valid, he was like, within the Black community, church is so strong, and it is a very strong draw within the community. He's like, but not just from a religious perspective, but as a community, because the community, and we'll say over the last 50 years, if you think back to the Civil Rights era, so much of the Civil Rights era was born in churches. We have the Reverend Martin Luther King, right? The Reverend Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton. These are religious people. Even Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan. These are religious people. Maybe different religions, but they're still religious people. And the civil rights, the physical rights, and the legal rights that Black people were trying to gain or to hold on to, the movements of those were rooted in the local church, because the local church was the local community meeting place. So when you go and say, you know what, I don't want to belong to the church anymore, you're separating sometimes from the community itself, or at least that's what some people think. And I just had never thought of that. I thought it was fascinating. So yeah, so back to this person's question, do you think more secular organizations need to reach out to these historical Black community or historically Black colleges? Yeah, I think they should. I'd love to throw that question out to Cynthia, because I think she'd have a very strong opinion on that. But I think so, because colleges are where you should learn different perspectives. Whether you agree with them or not, that doesn't matter. As I talked about, I think one of the first questions on today's show, where I told that young man, the 16-year-old, learn everything, investigate everything, ask questions about everything. Be like a 2-year-old again who just keeps asking why. On colleges, you should do that. And some colleges do a bad job on the left as well, where they say, oh, we don't want this person coming. Bring that person in. Let them stand up there and say things that sound foolish and illogical and just plain outrageous. That's fine. You should hear what other people have to say. Doesn't mean you're giving them any respect for it. Doesn't mean that you are condoning it in any way. But you should be aware that there are people out there that believe that. And if you go to a historically Black college and you're an atheist and you want to have a Ask an Atheist type of day, and if a lot of people push back on you, that's fine, because somebody in that crowd is like, I've been sort of wondering about this whole God thing. I'm not really convinced, but I'm the only Black person in my family that even thinks this way. And I didn't know a single other person. And that's what Cynthia has told me as well. She's a middle-aged Black woman. There's people out there that look at her and say, okay, I'm not the only one. Now, they know there's a lot of white atheists. Every person in the middle of even a small town knows that there's a lot of white atheists. But if you're a Black person in a small town, you can guarantee you don't know a single atheist. It's just the way it works. So yeah, I think that more secular organizations should reach out, and Cynthia's organization, again, the Black non-believers, that's exactly what that organization is for. I don't know if there are other organizations beyond hers. It's again not an area that I'm in. I'm not in the Black community, but if there are other organizations, I would welcome and support, if I could in some way, them going to Black colleges and universities and putting up a table or showing up on a debate, or just making their presence known as an outreach to say, we're here when you're ready. I would 100% support that with my time, effort, platform, some money, whatever it took, because I think it's important. So yeah, good question. What was it? Shep DC? Good question there. All right, here's a good question. So this is a comment to me. So this is from Liam5341. I didn't say that twice accidentally. His name is Liam5341. And his question is, how about instead of advocating for the government to steal from others, advocate for them to stop stealing from the rest of us. Okay. Okay. So there's a couple of different things going on here. So first of all, let me give you some context of where they're coming from. They're talking about a video that I made on churches avoiding property tax. Now, by and large, I'm going to say every community in America, maybe there's one, but I'm going to say it's almost guaranteed that every community in America, the church land and the church themselves do not pay property tax. And that is by category. Now, that's different, meaning there are lots of charities out there, and the charities have to fill out a form every year. It's a Form 990. This is an IRS form that breaks down what did that charity do. So I think I used the example in the mic drop I made. And there's a mic drop on this from, I think it's also from this month in January, maybe it was December, that talked about this. So if I had a charity that is a cat shelter, say, I take in stray cats and I fix them or neuter them, and I get those distributed out to the people that want to have a cat, I have to show, first of all, how much money I made, how I spent that money, how much each executive, say, in my organization is paid. I have to show how many cats I took in and how many cats I donated out, or whatever the word would be for that. I have to show all of this, right? And if I had my own, say, property where I had my shelter and everything, I could avoid paying property taxes. But I have to prove that I did something good for the community, and I have to back it with actual numbers. And if I showed, the cat sanctuary took in, $400,000 and yada, 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 and I had all these line item expenses, and the IRS said, yeah, but why do you have also a $200,000 expense on a Rolls Royce? And I said, well, because, I'm the cat daddy. I need a Rolls Royce to show how valuable I am as a cat daddy. They'd say, oh, yeah, well, thanks. But no, you're done. Churches do not have to file a 990. They can do pretty much anything they want. Look, I'm not making that up. It's not hyperbole. They can just go about, spend the money however they want, take in the money however they want. They do not have to show how that money was used. They have to show no benefit to the society, any of these other things. But one of the things I mentioned in that video is that they don't pay property taxes. And I used the study. I studied my zip code where I have a home. It's a rental home now, but where I have a home I raise my kids at. I found 7 churches in one zip code, my zip code, with $31 million of property that they paid 0 tax on. But remember, I just said I have a house there. So my house, I have to pay property taxes on it. Everyone in my neighborhood has to pay property taxes on it. The guy that owns the Ace Hardware, who has a freestanding building, he has to pay property tax on it. The guy that owns the gas station, he has to pay property tax on that. The church pays 0 property tax. They have a special carve out because they say, hey, I'm a church. So my point of that was all of our property taxes, we're the ones that have to take on extra burden for the roads and for the fire department and the police and all these various things in the schools, everything that contributes to society, and say that zip code specifically, we have to pay extra because the church doesn't pay. So what this person's doing, I'll read their question again. How about instead of advocating for the government to steal from others, advocate for them to stop stealing from the rest of us? This is something that happens a lot. Atheists get this. Probably everybody gets this to some degree. It depends on where you're at. But they get this sort of, I know there's probably a good word for this, but basically you're trying to shift the focus. Stop saying that the religion, the churches don't have to pay taxes. Instead, fight for all of us. No, my channel is about religion. It's about Christian nationalism. It's about the pushback. If you want to start a channel and talk about how taxation is theft, if that's what you're calling it, okay, I will listen to that. And if I agree with you, I'll support you on it. Do that. Make that your mission. But don't try to deflect and say that I shouldn't talk about churches not paying tax until I solve somehow the entire taxation problem. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can advocate for lower taxes for everyone while still ensuring that billion-dollar religious organizations aren't getting a free ride in the meantime. So this, again, this happens very, very often. We saw this a lot with immigrants, where people will say, "How come we have homeless vets on the streets and we're supporting an immigrant?" That's a stupid argument. We can do both. We're a big, huge country with a lot of money. We can do both. The problem is we don't do either very well. So you can't deflect and say that there's this sort of linear line that we have to solve one problem before we can move on to problem two. I can work on this issue. I can bring awareness to this issue about the churches not paying property tax. You can work on that issue about income tax being too high. And your neighbor, they can work on the issue of government waste. All three of us can be working as passionately as we can, trying to move the needle forward on our particular topic. I don't have to solve all the world's problems before I finally get to my issue. It's not the way it works. So this guy, Liam, 5341, it's a deflection. That's all it really is. But we get it a lot. It's not uncommon. So I wanted to bring that up because he did ask me. So Liam, there you go. There's your 15 minutes of fame. Hope you enjoyed it. All right, so let's see. We'll give you one more before we run for the day. This one is from, it looks like Bunny Vomit. They spelled the bunny differently, but okay. Bunny Vomit. Sure. When you were thinking of names, what made you think Bunny Vomit? I'm sure there's a story there, but we'll save that for a different day. But I'm going to end on this one because I thought it's actually kind of a nice little bookend, because my very first question, I believe, was about the 16-year-old that was having doubts and wondered if he was wrong. So this person, their title was, "My Mom Found Out I'm an Atheist." And I keyed on this one because I thought this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition. So let me read this. It says, "I feel free. I'm so glad I didn't have to pretend anymore. She literally texted me this morning asking me, 'Do you believe in God?' My first instinct was to lie to her because I didn't want to give her a second heart attack." He says, "I found out I was gay when I was 13, she found out I was gay when I was 13 and she lost her shit. But I said, fuck it, and truthfully answered her. I asked her why she asked me, and she said she could just tell. She didn't freak out though. Now I feel like I can tell the whole world without feeling guilt. I thought I was doing a good job at hiding it. Guess not. LAMFO. And I brought this, I wanted to end with this because I did see this and I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then I saw the part about he came out gay before he came out as atheist, which I thought was fascinating. I don't know what I think about that because, again, I've mentioned earlier, at 55 years old, when I was a teenager in the 80s, I don't think I knew, well, I can guarantee I didn't know any gay kids. Now, I say that. I knew gay kids, but they weren't out. And this kid said he was 13 years old, but I didn't know a 13-year-old that was out. I didn't know a 13 that was overly very sexual in any sense anyways, or, you liked your girls or you liked your boys or whatever. But, that wasn't really a big thing. But sexually saying, when people are 15, 16, 17 years old, and they start to be more sexually active, I didn't know any kids that were gay, again, or that were out. Now, after high school, I realized many of the kids I went to school were gay, but they didn't come out sometimes until they left town. I'm still friends with a good friend of mine in high school, and he came out, and he's married now to a man. I know a handful of others. But when I was in high school, coming out as gay, you couldn't have done anything worse in terms of just how society, and again, I grew up in the South, so double trouble down there, right? But maybe, and I don't know where this person, Bunny Vomit, I don't know where they live, but I thought it was really interesting that, and he just says, she found out I was gay when I was 13. Now, how she found out, I don't know. But nonetheless, he came out as gay. His mom was aware that he was gay. He was afraid to tell her that he was an atheist. So I think part of me says, congratulations. And I want to clap, 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 because being gay sounds like, based on this one simple anecdotal piece of information, is less of a problem than it was, say, when I was his age at 13. He's come out. I know it's not a problem. Trust me. As a parent of a gay woman, I understand it is still a problem for a lot of people. But the fact that he could come out before he could admit that he was an atheist is an interesting perspective. And I would love to talk to this person. I would love to find out how old they are now, because he doesn't say. I might send them a message because I'm curious what the difference is. If he's 14 now, okay, then it's within the same period of time. But if he's 17, 18, 19, 25 years old, who knows? And he's still been holding on to the atheist part. That's very interesting to me. So Bunny Vomit, love the name in a very weird way. Congratulations to you, man. Fantastic. I'm so happy for you. I really am genuinely very happy that you also seem to have a good mom. Because unlike some parents I have met, and I've told those stories, she didn't kick you out because she found out you're gay, and apparently she's cool with you being atheist. You got a good mom. You need to appreciate that woman. Hang on to her as best you can, because recognize that not everybody in your shoes has as good of a experience as you did. So I applaud you for coming out, and I applaud her for loving you as her child and accepting that maybe you see the world a little differently than she does, and she's okay with that. What a fantastic, small little story. I'm going to try to reach out to Bunny Vomit and see what he has to say about that. I'll let him know that I featured him on this show today. But I am very curious. I'd like to know a little bit more of his story. And if he's over 18, I don't like to if he's a kid, it's just too many problems. I don't want to get into deep discussion with him. And if he's over 18, I would actually be interested to talk to him on a show someday and just kind of go through that process, because I'm very genuinely very excited and sincerely happy for him. So I kind of wanted to end on a happy note. Again, thank you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Make sure you give us a little bit of a like or rate us high on a podcast, or if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, make sure you give us a like and subscribe to the channel. We love having you subscribe, and we love your questions, even if we disagree with them. If I disagree with your questions, but all I ask is that you be civil and respectful and have a good back and forth conversation, I'll talk to you for days. I absolutely will. Because I do value that and I like your perspective. So do that. Also, make sure you check us out at Atheistville.com. That's our website where this show is also going to be up. And usually I'll kind of go through some of these questions and sort of print them out so people can read them as well. But a lot of our other blog posts and essays and analysis is on there as well. So that's Atheistville.com. But again, thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you later. Take care.